Okay, so the penultimate episode of Rings of Power Season 1 has just released, and throughout this video we're going to be breaking it down, pointing out all the Lord of the Rings Easter eggs, and giving our review on the episode as a whole. Episode 7 ends with the awakening of a Balrog, as well as a 1990s text reveal that confirms the Southlands are now Mordor. The Balrog has the exact same look as it does in the Peter Jackson movies, and though there were many designs of them in the source material, they've clearly leaned into that. Now, it is said in the original trilogy that the dwarves unearthed the Balrog because they dug too deeply and hastily into the mines when trying to get more mithril. However, Balrogs are beasts that have been around for a long time, and they ended up joining Melkor in the unrecorded times. They originally lived in Autumno, but they ended up fleeing after the war for the sake of the elves, and from here they travelled to Angband, where they hibernated until the heirs of the trees. After Ungoliant destroyed them, the spider turned on Morgoth, and he screamed to the point that it woke the Balrogs up. They go through this constant stage of either being awake or hibernating. However, there's no mention of them during the Second Age, which is where the show predominantly takes place. The show changes the timeline a lot, and whereas the Balrog awakens here, it wasn't until the Third Age where the one in Khazad-dûm rose up. We've talked about this on other breakdowns, and how it wasn't until during the Fourth was king that the first one attacked. This Balrog ended up killing him. However, I think for the show that it will kill his father, and then he will take up the mantle. This will still allow it to have the nickname Durin's Bane, even though the character and events have been swapped around. So that's a basic breakdown of the Balrog, and for the rest of the video, we're going to be going through the episode scene by scene. If you enjoy them, please hit the thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe for breakdowns like this every day. By the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Rings of Power. Now, the episode itself is called The Eye. This has several meanings in Middle-earth, but predominantly it's referring to Sauron's eye, which features heavily in the main trilogy. However, the Eye of Sauron was a symbol of the character long before he became one, and it stood for his piercing gaze and how he looked over everything. An eye was also spotted on the weird group that are stalking the stranger, who we'll talk more about later on in the video. Now, the main exhaust port in a volcano is also referred to as an eye, and we open the episode with a focus on Galadriel's. This comes in the aftermath of the Pompeii-level explosion from last week that blanketed the land in ash. I was expecting this to kickstart a massive battle in which the orcs in Mordor were now free, and the survivors had to fight them off whilst trying to escape. What we get though is a slower paced entry with several scenes in which characters just sit about and talk to each other. This happens in the case of Galadriel and Theo, Elrond and Durin, Disa and Durin, and Nori and her mother. I'm trying not to rag on the show too much, as I know people genuinely just want to hear the breakdown, but I feel it's taking one step forward and two back with its pacing and dynamics. Now, Galadriel is stormed by a horse on fire early on, and this brings a lot of symbolism with it. Typically, horses on fire are used as symbols to represent machinery or fiery engines. Tolkien was against industrialization, and this is why characters like Saruman and the orcs were depicted as forces that pushed it. I think this horse is meant to represent that the beautiful Southlands have now been changed in these giant industrialized landscapes that have destroyed the picturesque place that it once was. Now, there's actually way more survivors in this scene than I thought would have come from a volcanic eruption of this size, and the characters all get covered in ash. Pompeii still stands as a monument to how devastating events like this can be, but our core cast of characters all end up surviving. I think the imagery of this is purposely shot to look like the aftermath of the Twin Tower attacks, with people blanketed in grey ash whilst they wander through the smoke. Now, I know that the show has to have these characters survive, but it was a bit weird seeing houses completely burned to the ground whilst Galadriel was fine even after taking the full force of it. I kinda wish that they'd taken cover last week instead of framing it like this, because there's a bit of a disconnect seeing people fine whilst the landscape looks worse than Sunderland. Ha ha ha, cut 'em, you suckers. Now, Valendiel is pulled out of the fire by Isildur, and the character would later go on to name one of his sons the same thing, with this show creating a reason for why that's the case. Isildur ends up getting lost, and there's a scream of his name, which to me sounded similar to how Elrond shouted it during the Fellowship of the Rings. This would of course end up happening in Mordor, and from here we cut to a stream. Isildur died in the Fellowship after jumping into a river, and this could be them matching up the shots to foreshadow that event. Here we join the Harfoots and discover that they've ended up settling on the edge of Mordor. The land has signs of ash in the fruit. There's also a giant volcanic rock that's ended up crashing there. Though I was thinking that the stranger might end up creating the Shire when they started saying about how long they could last there, I don't think that's the case. Looking at the map of Middle-earth, this is the complete opposite end to Mordor, so either the volcano shot things that far, or they are on the edge of Mordor. They did travel through the marshes that I thought could be the Dead Marshes, and they also end up talking about Greenwood the Great, which would go on to become Mirkwood. Therefore, I think this is a proto-Shire that shows the Harfoots can settle somewhere instead of constantly being on the move. There was a tweet earlier in the week about how Hobbit doors may be round like wheels because the Harfoots were always on the move, so maybe they'll tie things in with that. After accidentally becoming a peril, the stranger ends up leaving, and he's stalked by Feminem, who is called the Dweller. Along with her is the Ascetic and also the Nomad. The former means someone who practices discipline, with the latter meaning someone who travels from home to home without a permanent place to live. The plate they carried had the stranger's constellation on the back of it, and they clearly possess magical abilities. I think they're likely going to be the stranger's first major fight, so we can see how truly powerful he is. I can imagine that's the way his storyline wraps up next week, with him discovering the constellation on the plate, and us potentially getting it confirmed about who he is. It did cross my mind that it might be a misdirect, and that they could actually be forces of good that want to find him and teach him things, but they set the Harfoots home alight, so f*** them. Also, nice little line with Largo saying, "You harm a hair on their foot," and later he's asked to give them a moment to weep, similar to what happens with the Fellowship after the death of Gandalf. Nori ends up giving him an apple, and this is typically seen as a symbol of knowledge and wisdom. Apples popped up last week with Isildur throwing one away, whereas the stranger ends up taking it with him. The Dweller and co end up going after him, but they fall for the old, "I think you went that way, mate." Cut to Elrond promising to pimp the dwarves' caves if they help them get the mithril, which King Durin instantly shuts down. Even with Elrond's pleas about liking the video, being half-elf, and his son's words, he still sees things dying off as being a natural part of the world. King Durin brings up Aule, who in the lore created the dwarves. They also created the trees of Valinor, and convinced Eru to bring life to the Ents. He doesn't want to dig deep to help the elves, but he ends up unleashing the Balrog anyway by dropping the leaf into the darkness. The mithril pushes the corruption back on said leaf, and therefore I think it's going to be used as a way to fight in the future battles against the forces of Sauron. Mithril was said to be made from light contained in the two trees of Valinor, and we of course saw a Balrog fighting over this in episode 5. Now, one thing I love about the show is the dwarves, and to me, they're one of the strongest elements of the series. They all give really heartfelt and memorable performances, and though I'm ragging on the show a bit in general, I think the slower pace moments with them generally tend to work, as what they're saying has meaning and conviction. Disa especially seems to be the heart of their dynamic, and after some mother-in-law jokes, she gives Durin the nudge to help his friend after seeing what mithril does. Rather than saying goodbye, Elrond says Namarie, which means go towards goodness as well as be well. Elsewhere, Elendil desperately searches for his son, who doesn't end up turning up in the end. They might even do something where he's captured by the enemy, but Sauron could let him go after realizing he has a path ahead that could help him out. I also think it's possible that Galadriel and Halbrand might save him, as they travel off together towards the end of the episode. Look, I don't know mate, I'm just throwing theories out there, and Miriel also ends up becoming blind, which will no doubt allow Pharazôn to seize power easily. I think they're going to do something similar to President Roosevelt, who, in case you don't know, was paralyzed due to polio. However, due to people helping him stand and boots that he could lean on, it took a long time before the public realized. He kept it a secret because he didn't want to seem weak, and they seem to be doing something similar with the Queen Regent. Because she's blind, Pharazôn can tell her whatever he wants, and he can end up using this as a way to take over. Theo and Galadriel wander the wilderness too, and after she gives him her sword, the pair discuss Celeborn. In case you don't know, this is Galadriel's husband, and also the Lord of Lothlorien. Galadriel does say that Celeborn was slain, but we know from the timeline that this isn't the case. I think he's taken out the picture, so it can probably do some sexual tension between Galadriel and Halbrand, without making it look like she's a dirty cheat. We'll be on cheaters soon though, I promise you that. Either way, this scene is very reminiscent of when Frodo and the other hobbits hid under the tree whilst the ringwraiths stalk them. Orcs move overhead, and the shots are very similar with swords being drawn and the general positioning of the characters. Elsewhere, Durin and Elrond are caught digging too deep, and the way the mithril threads slowly light up is similar to how it happened when Gandalf lit it up in the Fellowship. Elrond is jazzy-jeffed out of Khazad-dûm, and King Durin talks to his son about how he was a sickly child, but that he saw greatness in him. He talks about seeing the grey beard of an old Dwarven king, and Dwarven kings were thought to be reincarnated from their ancestors. Durin III would eventually go on to become Durin IV, but the show has changed that up for its own mythology to have the two interacting with each other. They both had their own views, with his son saying his father is holding him back, whilst also wanting him to be a great dwarf. very much a comment on father and son relationships that sees Durin the Fourth being stripped of his necklace. Elendil wrestles with Isildur's horse Beric, and he and his son of course had a scene involving it last week. Beric is sent on his way, and this reminded me a lot of how Bill the Pony was sent back home when the Fellowship arrived at Moria. He knows the way, Sam. Don't worry about him. He knows the way home through those 40 miles of mountains and then 500 miles of field. He'll be home in no time, Sam. Don't you worry, mate. Anyway, we discover Bronwyn and Arondir are alive, along with Halbrand, who's been badly injured. Initially, the Númenóreans want to pack up and return home, but Galadriel appeals to Miriel and convinces her not to abandon the men to their fate. She rides off in the end back to Númenor to get more forces, but I think the kingdom is going to be stolen from her upon her return. I think they could have cut the scene at this point, but instead we get a focus on Elendil crying in what's one of the most jarring moments in the show. I don't think my guy's a bad actor, and he has delivered a lot of really good moments, but something just felt off about this scene to me. Obviously he's devastated as some might be dead, but the moment just kind of loses it a bit due to feeling almost like an insert shot. Might have been the direction or something, but I think it would have been better just to shoot him from the side with a teardrop rolling down his cheek. Instead, we get another moment that's going to be all over the internet, and it's a shame as this could have been quite an empowering scene. I know some of you won't mind it though, so let me know if I'm blowing it out of proportion, but yeah, I personally just thought it was a bit weird. Now the Harfoots make their own fellowship, with them all deciding to join up. There's a moment in fellowship when Merry and Pippin join the group, and it's all about not going at it alone. Galadriel initially wants to go to Gil-galad, but she and Halbrand end up riding off in the end. After King Durin orders for the mithril hole to be sealed up, he throws a leaf in that shows you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. We end with Adar announcing the Southlands are no more, and close out with a weird stylistic choice. I personally just don't think the changing of the text like this fits in with the style and aesthetic of the show, and it felt like something we would get in a 90s TV series. I think it would have been done way better if we just cut to black and heard Adar whisper, Mordor, or something, but either way, that ends the episode. And it's an episode that, again, I'm pretty torn on. It has its high moments, but for 70 minutes, there's not really a lot that goes on that feels important. Much like episode 5, I think you could have probably skipped a lot of these scenes and still ended up at the same point for us in the finale. The show has a habit of doing very little until the last couple of minutes, where it teases something big for next time. However, we've been through that enough now to the point where it often fails to deliver on it the week after, and because of this, it's becoming a bit difficult to get excited. Now, Amazon have promoted the finale as being something big, and I really hope it is. I know there's some of you out there who think that I play up my negative opinions for views and clicks, but on the whole, when a show is well liked, my videos do much better. It's always better for my channel when I'm really enjoying something, and the viewers are too, but I have to be honest with myself and say I'm not really having a good time with this. I've even had people saying they hope Amazon remove my early access, but that shows me they just want to live in a world where everyone agrees with them, and that people should only be allowed to give their opinions if it's extremely positive. I personally, I'm just being honest, and I'm really struggling to see where the budget has gone, with each episode costing more to make than Deadpool did, which I just can't get my brain around. This is the most expensive TV show of all time, and it should really be a spectacle, but it feels like not that much really happens, and it's just characters discussing how they feel, rather than showing it with their actions. I do hate saying stuff like this, as I know a lot of work will have went into the show, but yeah, this was probably my least favourite episode of the entire series. I think the misfires with the crying scene and the text as well just felt like a bad way to put across their point, and it just detracted from me rather than ramping things up for what could be a big finale. The show is so poorly paced, and looking back I'm thinking there's a lot of weird choices in what they spend their time on. Thinking about it, I think episode 1 would have been way more powerful if the entire entry was the opening montage, and then we ended with a big gut punch which came with the death of Galadriel's brother. Instead of focusing on things like that though and giving them the proper time, they gloss over it for episodes like this where we spend ages talking about minor things. Feels weirdly imbalanced, and I think moments like that could have been given more weight to them rather than what we get here. If you disagree, obviously let me know below. I do hate hating on a show, you know. Like I said, it's much more beneficial for me if people are really enjoying it, but I have to be honest and just give my true feelings. So that's my thoughts on the series this week. I'm still a bloody shill though, so yeah, keep sending me free stuff. And we are in a competition right now and giving away Thor Love and Thunder on the 15th of October. All you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and comment below with your thoughts on the episode. We pick the comments at random at the end of the month, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at HeavySpoilers. If you want something else to watch, make sure you check out one of our House of the Dragon videos, which will be linked on screen right now. We go over lots of stuff that you need to know for the series, so definitely head over there right after this. Out of the way, thanks for sticking through the video. I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.